As President Trump wraps up his first 100 days in office of his second administration, new CBS News polling shows less than half of Americans approve of how he's doing. Our latest numbers show his approval rating sitting at 45%. That's an 8% drop from early February, just a few weeks into his term when his approval was at 53%. Since then, it has been a steady decline. CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins us now. Anthony, good to see you here. Is he doing what he promised?
Well, that's exactly what we asked, folks. And what I'm going to show you here is 6 in 10 people think, in fact, that he is. Now, look, whether they like it or not, as you described, his ratings are a little bit down, right, from where he started. He started pretty high. But look at what it is among Trump voters. You get this almost 9 in 10 that say that he is. And he's got really strong approval from that political base, which helps, again, note that we're in a different, very partisan, very polarized political environment here. The difference in the movement on a lot of those ratings, right, is on this. Here's the handling of the economy. Now, that's down as well, as is handling inflation. But the reason for that is that it's coming from people who kind of gave him a chance on the economy. They're not necessarily Republican MAGA voters, but they thought that he, in his policies, would make them financially better off. Instead, they're saying that they're not, and they think the administration isn't focused enough on lowering prices. Prices, as folks who've been watching know, have long been the top concern of Americans, and that's what explains some of that movement.
The economy, one of the biggest issues, but also one of the biggest issues that the president is focused on is immigration and his crackdown on illegal immigration. How do people feel about that? And is there a distinction between whether people approve of a crackdown on illegal immigration and whether they approve of how it's being handled?
You know, I think that's the perfect question because you do see that break, right? Here is the approval of the program in general, right? The program for deportations. That stays at 56% approval. That's about where it's been. But if you follow that up when you ask about, as you said, things that may or may not happen in practice, look at this. You get 3/4 of folks who say it's not acceptable if, as part of that program, legal U.S. residents are mistakenly detained. And that explains some of the movement, too, on immigration more generally. So, again, there's the sort of broad idea and then what happens in practice.
How it's being applied. What about his use of executive orders, presidential powers?
Well, that really ties into all that, right? And that's part of the larger theme. Couple of things here. One is that on the matter of using executive orders, there's still a large number who would say, let's say in theory, it's checks and balances, right? They want a president to work with Congress to pass laws.
That number surprises me. This is your bread and butter, so maybe it doesn't surprise you, but that seems very high.
You often get people who say in the abstract that there's a role for Congress. They don't necessarily always approve of Congress, but that back and forth is part of the process, right? There is. And that quarter say use executive orders. Now, that doesn't mean they don't want him to do the policies that they want him to do, but that's part of the process. And look, this is somewhat related, right? What should happen if the Supreme Court rules against the administration? Big number, it should follow the court's ruling. So again, that's still majority that thinks in terms of those checks and balances.
Big respect for the branches and separation of powers. All right, Anthony Salvanto, thank you as always.
Thanks.
CBS News will have special coverage all day Tuesday of the first 100 days of the president's second term.